Okay, so now let's go ahead and investigate another data type called tuple, which is part of the collections or data structure collection, just like we did with list. Now, how do we put a tuple together? You could do something like this. My tuple as a variable equals, and notice now we don't put brackets like we did with lists. We're going to put the elements of the tuple in here, and it could be a mix of things. Let's say Jane as a name, comma. So it looks like a list, but we could see the difference here. Let's put a 7 here. Let's put something like yes, and let's put 8.9. So we've got variety of data types in there, all right? So what if we simply printed the tuple? So let's go ahead and just simply print this. My tuple, okay? And let's see what it looks like. As you can see here, so unlike when we simply printed a list, we get brackets, now you get these parentheses. Now, what's the difference? It's immutable. You can't literally change it or do anything to it directly. I will show you how to make changes though. So what can be done here? Well, can we access every member individually? In other words, is it indexed? So can I do my print my tuple and then index 0? So that means I am trying to index this item. Let's see what happens. Yes. So can I do the same thing? So let me just copy this here and index all of them, right? So let's do 2 or 1 here in the order, and then 2 here. So let's see what happens here. Okay, let's do one more, and this would be 3, and that would show us all the content. Now let's do one more and try to go beyond or out of range, right? So we're going to put a 4 here. Let's see what we get. And we get an error because it's out of range. So there is no index 4, so you have index 0, 1, 2, 3. So in terms of behavior, so far it almost looks like a list. Now in a list, we were able to append data, right? So we were able to do that. We were able to also change data. Now let's say we want to change Jane into something else. So let's take my tuple 0, that particular item, and try to change it to, let's say, another item in there, Kelly. Right? So we assume that we're going to change Jane, right, which is this particular one, and put Kelly, and try to print my tuple again. Now, let's see what happens when you try to do this. And now you get another error. It says it's not supported. You cannot change an item. Okay, so we now know that. So we cannot change. So everything is fixed here. Okay, so what if you wanted to change? Well, we'll get to that in a few minutes. What if we want to append? What if we wanted to add an item? Well, let's go ahead and try to append this time. So we know this will not work. So let's do a dot here and see if we can have an append. And notice you don't get such thing. Okay, so can I get a count? Oh yeah, sure, you can get a count. So maybe size of some item, or let's say found equal. And then if you do count, that's to find something, just like we did with, so what are you going to find? I want to find if Jane was there. So let's go ahead and we found Jane this many times. And then you can print the count, which is found. Let's see what happens here. Okay, so we found her at least once. Now, if we didn't have Jane capital, let's say lowercase, this is case sensitive, then we get a 0. As you can see here, there's no such thing as Jane uppercase J. So, but if it's consistent, Jane here, and let's add another Jane again here. Now I can change this while it's part of the code, right? So let me make sure that I have my quotes in the proper place. Let's see how many times it's found. And there you have it. You have twice. You found Jane twice. Okay, so yes, we could have duplicates, but we cannot change anything here. So let's suppose we actually wanted to change Jane to Kelly and keep 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items in this tuple and keep the tuple the way it is. Okay, so how do we go about it? Let's go ahead and clean it up. So let's just print it the way it is. This is what we have, Jane, Jane, 7, yes, 8.9. But now I want my tuple to have Jane, Kelly, 7, yes, and 8, 9. So what can I do there? Well, there is a way around this. You can create a list, or it's like a buffer, that will take into it these values that are already there. So how would you do that? Maybe my list, and use the constructor list. But notice now, instead of just an empty list, we're going to put in my tuple as an argument. And let's go ahead and print the list. Print my list. Right, so we get to see now that not only we have a tuple, but we have a list that has duplicate items. But since now it's a list, I can modify Jane into Kelly. So I can go to my list, and that particular one is 1, and then put Kelly in there. Okay, can we print the list again? So let me just copy this and paste it here. And let's see our modified list. As you can see, we went from Jane, Jane, 7, yes, 8.9 to Jane, Kelly, 7, 8. But we only have a list. We don't have a tuple. The tuple hasn't changed. So what do? You write over the tuple you already have. And you're going to use a tuple constructor, just like we used a list constructor. So how do you do that? You're going to go back to the variable my tuple, and you're going to write over it using the tuple constructor. But the argument of the tuple will be my list. And now let's prove that we indeed were able to effectively change an immutable tuple, right? So print my tuple, and let's see what happens now. And there you have it. So now we were able to change an item in the tuple, but we had to do a work around it by moving it into a list, using the list constructor, modify what you need to modify where you need to modify it, and then reconstruct the tuple using the tuple constructor with the list as an argument, and store it back in the same variable or any other variable that you want to represent the tuple that is the end product that you want. Okay, so for the next lesson, we're going to look at other methods associated with tuples, and hopefully we'll wrap it up that way. See you then.